Hello everybody, it's Mr. Kerbal, the Grange Head Teacher. This is a special video made for Malala Class. Malala Class, you're brilliant, and I'm going to give you some special class charts points because when I came in and you were doing your Victorian Day, you had so many questions. I couldn't answer all of them, and I said to you, write them down on post-it notes, give them to your teacher, and she will give them to me. And guess what? Miss El Wahabi gave me your questions. So here we go. Malala Class. So the first question I've got, when you want to do sometimes, you will need to be brave. You need to be brave and happy and not scared, but be very brave when you want to do something. Right. Okay. This is actually a beautiful statement. So this wasn't actually a question. This is from one of our great, magnificent Malala pupils. And you are saying that what you take from it, because we spoke about how in Victorian times, the teachers and the headmasters in Victorian times were not very kind to the children. They just said that children are meant to be seen and not heard. And we spoke about how at Grange, we want our children to have a voice, that we want them to be respectful and polite and to be good listeners, but also to be able to voice their opinions. And this is what you are saying. This is pupil M from Malala. You're saying that what we need to do is to be brave and happy and not be scared, but be brave. When you want to do something, have a go. When you want to do something good and it's a good choice, have a go. Be brave. Right, here's the next question. Are all Victorian headmasters mean and horrible? That's a great question. So I'm going to say, I don't think that every single Victorian headmaster was mean and horrible. I'm sure a lot of them were. I'm sure even the majority were, because those were the times in Victorian times, and that is how the way that their philosophy and how they treated children. But I'm sure that there were some kind teachers and some kind head teachers. And if anybody's got any examples, go research and bring them back to me. But what I will say is, if you remember, I spoke about a book from Charles Dickens, who was one of the greatest Victorian writers, one of the greatest English writers of all time. But Charles Dickens, he wrote a book called Hard Times. And remember I told you about Mr. Gradgrind? And in fact, even in the English dictionary, if you look it up, Gradgrindian means teachers who just about facts and don't allow imagination. But if you read the book Hard Times and you get to the end, you will see that Mr. Gradgrind was actually really kind. So I'm going to say it's never that everybody's mean and horrible. But most Victorian headmasters, unfortunately, behaved in a very mean and horrible way. How did, let's see, you wanted to know how were mistakes treated by teachers in Victorian times? That was really, okay, so that's your question. Unfortunately, when children made mistakes in Victorian times, they were not given a chance, like at our school at Grange, where we reflect, where we can talk it over, where we can restore, we can fix up our mistake and learn from a mistake and do better. Unfortunately, when people made mistakes, that was it. They were just punished. There were consequences. You learned about the dunce cap, standing in the corner, being beaten with the cane. Really, really horrible. But at Grange, we practice a CC way. That means when we do make a mistake, and anybody can make a mistake, we reflect, we look back at the mistake and we think about it. We think about what we could have done differently. We learn from it and we fix it up. We can go and apologize. We do restoration. We restore. So that's it. The next question is, who is still alive from Victorian times? Well, I'm going to say nobody's still alive from Victorian times, because Victorian times kind of really ended at the beginning of the 20th century. I'm going to say I don't think there's anybody alive still from Victorian times, from when Queen Victoria was still alive. So that's why history is so important. We've got to learn from what people have left us. That's history. We take the evidence we've got, the books, the writings, the photographs, the pictures, the letters. That's the best thing about learning from history. But another thing is that when we are sometimes studying, it's really important to go and interview people who are still alive from a long time ago. So, for example, if you're learning about the Second World War, there are still people alive from the Second World War. Quite important to hear what they have to say and to get their testimony. So, great question. Here's another question. Who is my favorite author? And I'm thinking you're asking from favorite author from Victorian times. Well, I'm going to say Charles Dickens, without a doubt. I've read all of his novels that he published, except for the last one he didn't complete. He died before he completed it. But Charles Dickens, wow, he's just amazing. If you get a chance to read Charles Dickens' books, please read them, and you will learn lots about Victorian time from Charles Dickens. And Charles Dickens was also very good at thinking about what needed to improve in his time. And because of the things that he wrote about, a lot of times we spoke about this, a Victorian humanity has improved from those times, especially look at our education, look at our school, how we have done so much better than Mr. Wackford Squares. So well done. My favorite author, Victorian author, is Charles Dickens. And you ask, who's my favorite Victorian artist? Now, that is a harder question for me, and I have to think about artists from that time. But I'm going to say in my head straight away, I'm hearing Dante Gabriele Rossetti. But I'll have to do a bit more research about that, because when I was thinking about Victorian times, I wasn't thinking so much about Victorian artists. So great question. How old was Queen Victoria at the start of the Victorian times? What a brilliant question that is. I would have to look that up, but I'm going to just say to you, homework. That's something you could research. You could look. I think that people generally talk about the start of Victorian times as in 1830, which is nearly 200 years ago. And I'm just sort of thinking to myself, Queen Victoria herself, so this is a really good history we need to find out. And Queen Victoria herself, let's just see when she was born. So Queen Victoria, well, she was born in 1819, and people say Victorian times start from 1830, but when did she become queen? So coronation date, so let's just see, 1838, that's when she, so Queen Victoria, if we just said she was born, Queen Victoria was born, when did we say she was born? She was born in 1819, and then she became queen 1838. So really young. Wow, she was really young when she became queen. So yeah, so Victorian times starting when Queen Victoria wasn't even really 30 years old yet, which is quite something. Right, so next question. Yeah, that's somebody just said, let's see. And another posty note over here. What were Victorian classrooms like? Very, very interesting question. Actually, some of the buildings that our English schools are in are still from Victorian times. So the shape of the classroom wasn't necessarily so different. But I mean, like in our school, which actually our school's from 1949, our school was built, so definitely after Victorian times. But even in schools which are in Victorian buildings, and you can see them, usually their windows have been improved to let more light in and just to insulate the heat as well. But I think the most important thing about Victoria, also our lighting, in a lot of classrooms, the lighting is much, much better than it was in Victorian times. We'll have LED lights and brighter lights than they would have had in Victorian times, and also the displays, because in Victorian times I think they wouldn't really have bothered to put up children's work as displays. And now if you go into most classrooms, you see children's work, or you see work, like in our school, you see working walls. Like look in your classroom, have you got an English working wall? You've got a maths working wall? You should, because that's what we do in all the classrooms in Grange. But what a great question. What were Victorian classrooms like? Yes, imagine if we could get in a time machine and go straight there. And here's a great question to finish off with. How was school made? How was school invented? And that's the interesting thing, is because remember when I was talking to you about school, Victorian headmasters, and I read to you a little bit about at the time, well, state schools like we have today, that every child needs to go and be in school until at least the age of 16 in England, Well, that really came into law during Victorian times. They started changing the law that every child had to go to school, because in Victorian times, lots of times children, especially of poor families, couldn't afford, they had to go to work. And remember, I told you about Charles Dickens. Even Charles Dickens, because his father didn't have enough money to pay off his debts, had to go and work at the age of 12. He was working in a factory to make money for his family so his father could get out of what was called the debtor's jail, which was in Victorian times. So the whole way, schools that we have today, a lot of changes have come about, and even changes in the 20th century, and even changes not so long ago, because in the 1980s we started talking about the national curriculum, and every school has its own curriculum, but there's a national curriculum in England that we all have to at least follow that and then build on it. So that only started 40 years ago. So the point is, it's actually quite interesting, and some people write about the history of education. And if you do want to read, I think a fantastic book, and I think I've got it on my bookshelf, it's the Cambridge Primary Review, which really tells you all about the history of primary school education in England up until the early 2000s, I think it is. Yes, but we could have a lot of discussion about that. Where do I think the future of education should go? But the most important thing that I feel children need, and that's what we have at Grange, is children need confidence, to believe in themselves and to be kind to themselves and to be their very best. And children need consideration, to care about the world and want to make the world a better place. So Malala Class, that video was made especially for you. I'll put it on our YouTube channel. Anybody can watch it, but it was made for you. Marvelous Malala. Amazing class. And listen to the name of your class, Malala Class. Go and look up who Malala Yousafzai is. She's the inspiration for your class name. Be great, be Grange, live the CC way.